Well, a happy Sunday morning to all of you out there this morning. It's a beautiful day that God has given us, and thank you so much for joining us in this weekly Hebrew word study. As you can see on your screen, we are in 1 Samuel chapter 22 and finishing up. And of course, last week we had a very sad episode where this man named Doeg killed 85 of the priests and their sons and families. But here we see in verse 20 that one of them escaped. Um, it's Vayimalet ben Echad le'Ahimelech ben Ahitub Ushmo Ebitar. And so the names here are very interesting. Ahimelech, you'll find the difference when you read it in the Hebrew versus how the English transliterates it is very different. You can see that the lamed here is a preposition to. You see the word achi, which is the word for brother, and then you see the word melech. So his name really means to the brother of the king is who he was named after or had somewhere in his lineage. So that's always very interesting. Even Achituv, you see the first part of the Aleph and the Chet is the word for brother, and Tov or Tuv is a form of good. So he was the good brother. So anyway, this man escaped, fled to David, told him, his name was Abiathar, and told him what had happened. And of course, David took this very much to heart here. And we find, if you follow through in the scriptures, Abiathar will remain linked with David, will become actually the high priest once he brings all of the worship centralized into Jerusalem, and will stay there until Solomon somewhat removes him later on because Abiathar didn't follow after Solomon and kind of followed after Adonijah and supported him, and Saul didn't like that, and so had him removed as high priest. So very interesting man, very loyal to David, and fulfills quite a role in David's spirituality and David's relationship with God. And so Abiathar comes, tells what had happened when Saul killed them. And of course, here we are looking at the Hebrew and we see something that I always like to point out. It's called the um, Kere and Kathiv. It really means what is the difference between what is read and what is spoken. And basically, that's a nuance in the Hebrew that you do not find in the English, where there's words that the translators and the Hebrew readers do not understand. And so what they have done, and this has been done since the 9th century when this Masoretic text was created, that they'll put parentheses around um, one word and brackets around the other word. And the word in brackets is the one without the vowel pointings, and it is the one that exists in the writings that they originally referenced, but the pronunciation has been lost, the meaning has been lost, the spelling, they don't know where it came from. It was nothing that they remember. So they put in what they felt is the current modern time, this being 900 AD, of what the spelling and pronunciation should have been. And that is what has made it into our pronunciation and into the English translations. But in the Hebrew, you get to see the difference there, and you get to decide if that's really what you feel God's presence is leading you to understand. But little thing here or there. So anyway, this guy Doeg, I don't quite understand why he turned out to be such a bad guy. He seemed to have good intentions, but maybe under a cloak of evil intentions. So we see here that Abiathar's fleeing for his life. David says in verse 23, stay with me. I'll show mercy unto you. Again, David took this personally, that he felt he influenced or caused the death of these righteous persons. You see this as a revealing of David's heart, of him being a man after God's own heart, having a heart of compassion and a heart of mercy. And so he's going to protect Abiathar. So we'll go now into chapter 23, and we get some interesting things happen here. Um, Vayagidu le David lemor, hine Philistim nichamim. They're fighting, the Philistines are fighting against the city of Keilah, and they're robbing the threshing floors. And so it's interesting here that these men from Israel come to David and ask him for help rather than going to King Saul. You'd think they would have gone to King Saul. He's got the big army. He would defend them. But obviously something has happened in Saul's life that nobody trusts him. Nobody feels he's going to come through for them or deliver them. And so they come to David and find David and ask David for help, knowing that David is being um, appointed by God and will be used by God to help them. And so David, again, here's what we love to see, that David in verse 2 inquired of Yahweh, and saying, "Shall I go and attack the Philistines?" And how he inquired here is where somewhat our mystery comes in, is how did David do this? As Christians in this time frame, we only know of prayer. We do know of divine prophecy. We know of tongues and interpretation being given. We know what we feel of God's Spirit leading us and guiding us. But was this anything like David was encountering, what David was accustomed to, is what I'm wanting to say, because he said he inquired of the Lord's and asked a question, shall I go and attack the Philistines? And it says here that Yahweh says to David, Vayomer Yahweh el David, lech vehikta, um, the Philistines, go and attack the Philistines. And of course, this word vehikta is to smite. It's of smiting with the knuckles, of doing damage. So it's implied that he's going to go and smite them. It doesn't say he's going to rout them, doesn't say he's going to um, wipe them all out, but it does use the word that he's going to save Keilah. Kind of interesting that it uses this word, um, behoshata, to save. And of course, David knew what this meant, but doesn't quite sit well with the rest of his men. And so the rest of the men say to him, well, we're afraid to go. We're afraid staying here in seclusion. Now we're going to go out and go against the armies of the Philistines where everybody knows where we are. And, we're not so sure that we believe that you heard from God. We're not so sure. And we don't trust the same way you do, is basically what happened. So look at the mercies of God here. He allows David to go back again in verse 4. And so David goes back and inquires of Yahweh. And then it's got a samach here, which you don't see again in the English, but it's a stopping point. It's a punctuation point. So it really is a pause. It's a pause and a moment to stop and think about it, that they're supposed to take notice. So Vayosev O David Lishol Adonai, or by Yahweh, and then stop, have a pause. And in this pause is where God answered him and said, arise, go down to Keilah. But then it uses some different words. It uses the word notain for deliver, which is really the word forgive, that I will give it into your hands, give the Philistines into your hands. And obviously this was enough for David's men to feel good about this and feel like, okay, this is what we want to do. But again, how did this communication happen? Um, and so this is where it's always interesting. So I'm going to show you a couple things that I'm going to attach in the um, email when I send it out, and that is about an ephod. Um, we're going to find a little bit more of it later on when David again has an encounter with Abiathar, and they talk about the ephod, and David would wear the ephod, and the men that wear the ephod. And again, this, as you can see, is taken from a website called thetorah.com. And of course, this is obscure. We don't have all the answers. We don't know all what it is, but it's some interesting reading. I'll attach these um, PDF files and you can read through them. And there's also another one we'll put. Rambam is an acronym for a Jewish sage that lived in the Middle Ages and very respected. And he wrote from his time frame and his understanding of uh, both oral traditions and written biblical Torah, what he felt they were, and taking some scriptures and talking about them. So again, some very interesting things that maybe we in Christianity don't ascribe to, but Judaism surely does. And so I will send these to you for some interesting reading. We're going to see here that David fought against, with his men, fought against the Philistines, and the Lord did deliver Keilah into their hands, struck them with a mighty blow. And so we'll stop at verse 5, pick up on verse 6 later, and talk a little bit more about his communication with God, this ephod, and you'll have a little bit of history for us to go into next week's lesson. So God bless you. Take care. Thanks so much for joining this, and hope to see you next week. Bye bye.